Good morning, everyone. We're going to give it another minute or two for those joining us, and we'll get started shortly. Thanks for being here. Grab your coffee. We're going to get started in about 20 seconds. Thanks for being here. We'll give another minute for folks, gentlemen. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the Win-Win webinar series, our first Win-Win webinar of 2024. So I think it's still a little too late to say Happy New Year, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. This will be the last official Happy New Year for me for this year until next year. I'm Bill Bymel, your host of the Win-Win webinar series. For those of you that are joining us live here, our loyal regular attendees, thanks for being here. And a reminder that we do have a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and I welcome you to ask any questions you have during the hour today. If you're watching a replay, which most of you do watch the replay, I do want to thank you for joining the Win-Win webinar series. And we have a very exciting hour planned for you. Today is February 14th, 2024. That's Valentine's Day, as you can see from my over my shoulder here. And no better thing for consideration for me than to honor three amazing women in the real estate and mortgage finance business. I'm going to introduce Linda Taylor, Lena Motz, and Trixy Castro in a moment. But in a reminder, we do this series once a quarter, and if you don't get enough of me once a quarter, I also have the Real Estate Lowdown podcast, which I am recording weekly, and you'll hear conversations with guests like you're seeing today. You can find me on anywhere that you listen to podcasts. I have all of a sudden, now that I'm doing podcasts, become obviously a podcast lover myself. So let me invite our guests, Linda Taylor, Lena Motz, and Trixy Castro, to join me and just welcome you each for being here. And thanks for joining the Win-Win webinar. And let's start by having each of you introduce yourself. We'll start with Linda and then Lena and Trixy, and tell the world what you do and why I would have you here. Well, maybe you can't read my mind, can you, Linda?
Well, let's start with just saying thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this, Bill. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm Linda Taylor, the CEO of H.O.M.E.S, Inc., here in sunny, warm South Florida. Sorry about that, Lena, as you shiver in Minnesota. But we're celebrating 25 years of service to the Broward County community, and really proud of the work that we're doing, helping families create home and community. We own a 2-acre site about 5 minutes from downtown Fort Lauderdale. And on our campus, we have 30 young people who've aged out of foster and relative care who live in a self-sufficiency program with us. In addition to that, we own several scattered sites of affordable housing. And although I'll be talking about affordable housing quite a bit, I have to say it really has termed out and is an oxymoron here in Broward County. The two just don't seem to go together very well anymore. It's quite a struggle even for nonprofits, to acquire additional affordable housing, as well as to assist those participants that we work with in acquiring housing. One of the programs that we are working with that I am most proud of is one with Bill and First Lien. And it's a HUD program that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more as we get into this conversation, but it's one that's giving us and our clients access to more affordable housing. And had it not been for this program, I don't know how we would be building the capacity of our nonprofit. So I'm excited about that as well. So again, thank you so much for having me, Bill.
Oh, that's so great. Thanks for and we will get more into how we've come together. H.O.M.E.S, your organization has been around it's celebrating its 25th year as an operating nonprofit and really making a real noticeable impact in the local community of South Florida. And it's just really been great working with you. I can't wait to talk more about that. Lena, I haven't seen you since London, and we sat on a panel together, and I just think you're brilliant. Let's tell everyone who you are.
Well, thank you for that, Bill. And the feeling is mutual. I think how fun was that panel? We had some real legends in the commercial loan market on that panel, and we had great fun. I don't think any of us used microphones. I think all of us had big enough voices on that platform. But I echo Linda's sentiments. Thank you so much for putting this together and for including me as well. So by way of background, again, Lena Motz, I am CEO and CIO of Stillwater Asset Management. We are a registered investment advisor focused on alternative investments. More specifically, where we really spend our time is on private debt. We look to acquire commercial loan portfolios that are secured by real estate. And then we utilize a value investment approach to underwrite those. We're acquiring those at a discount to the real estate value that supports them. And then we look to generate additional alpha on that return through a pretty high touch borrower first servicing process. We also have a loan servicing company affiliated with us called Willow River. And really, we look at the market as providing access to a segment of the U.S. credit market that a lot of investors can't access because of the significant barriers to entry. I think that's, one of our biggest value propositions. And the second value proposition of what we do is really about the underlying real estate that supports the loans we acquire. It really protects our investors in a downside scenario. And of course, if anyone has been reading any headlines the last 2 weeks, we are, seeing what's happening in commercial real estate valuations. This is definitely a hot button issue. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that, but whether or not it's idiosyncratic or systemic, I think remains to be seen. And 2024 is really going to be a story about, what's happening in the commercial real estate space.
I just realized I was on mute and I started talking again while I was on mute. And I'm sure you are very busy today with opportunities flooding your desk, and I cannot wait to get into that. Trixy Castro, another commercial finance person. I've known you for, the longest of anyone on this thing. It's been over a decade that we've known each other. Tell us about Trixy Castro.
It feels like it was just yesterday, right, Bill?
Right.
No, thank you so much for having me, Linda, Lena. It's an honor to be here with both of you. I've heard so many amazing things from Bill, and I admire other women in business truly coming in and being trailblazers. I'm a serial entrepreneur, guys. I started my first company at 14 years old, a real winner, Trixie's Tutor Time. And I realized that I had the most amazing opportunity to live out the American dream. I'm first generation. My parents came here from Cuba. I'm so proud to be an American and be here and want to be able to provide housing, job creations, approach. And so that was all what, really was the driver to creating several companies in the private money and real estate space, and have an amazing team that's been with me for 20 plus years. We don't like to tell that to people, but hey, we all started together.
When you were
We've all-
kids, right?
Yeah, exactly. One really was. My first employee really was 14 years old, and you know her, Brittany.
Oh yes, Brittany. Oh yeah, just give a shout out to our friend Brittany.
Yeah, so it's been great. But I'm a founder of a company, TRX Capital, right? And also a private money lender, really going in and being that debt arm for the regional groups, for the developers way through.
Oh, that's great. And it's interesting because you and Lena play both in the commercial space. You're dealing in larger dollar amounts. Lena, you're buying more seasoned, what we call seasoned loans. For those that don't know the mortgage loan industry, a lot of folks that watch our webinar will, but some might not. You know, there's the origination side of lending where Trixie plays in. And you know, whether it's a private lending or institutional lending and originating new loans, which can also play a very important role. And I think you've kind of segueing into that now with bridge lending in terms of the maturity mismatches that exist versus Lena, you're going out and buying existing deals where there's, you know, somebody's in trouble or the bank is trying to unload the assets. Let me start with you, Lena. I mentioned it. You must be busy. I know I'm pretty busy as a distressed debt buyer today. It's a little still of that buyer's, you know, that seller buyer bid-ask spread thing going on. Let's bring everyone to where the state of commercial real estate is on the distress side, on the non-performing side, because we are starting to see the headlines big time. 60 Minutes did a huge thing. Tell us where things really are from, you know, your boots on the ground perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to spend too much time talking about office because that's really been carrying the headlines of the day. And we all know work from home and COVID impacted, you know, office and vacancies, you know, occupancy and return to work has been slow. And it's really geographic dependent. There are certain cities that have much lower return to work percentages than others. I don't want to spend a ton of time on that other than to say, you know, something that came up on the panel you and I were on last fall was, you know, how prevalent is the conversion from an exit standpoint for office. And, you know, I think what you heard from all of the panelists across the board were, you know, conversion is really difficult and expensive. And not all buildings are meant for conversion. In fact, very few of them are. Right. And so, you know, as we look at office, we're very sniper-like in that there's very few opportunities that make sense for us. We are not a loan-to-own shop. So, you know, as I mentioned in my intro, we really like to put a borrower first sort of philosophy forward and how we work out these loans. And to simply buy debt to take back the real estate, while we're certainly willing and able to do that, that's not sort of our core competency. And so where our core competency really lies is in what we're seeing, you know, sort of outside of office. And that is we have a slew of, you know, small business owners, multifamily, you know, landlords, retail landlords who have found themselves in a very difficult position of, you know, 5 times or 500 basis point increase in interest rate. And what that's done to the expense side of the equation. Meanwhile, we've got, you know, tenants and some of those income producing properties. A lot of those tenants have taken this opportunity to renegotiate leases. And so the question is, you know, your revenues are coming down, expenses are going up, and then throw in increased labor cost, right? And so there's been some really significant dislocations in commercial real estate. Everyone's been talking about office. To me, I think multifamily is sort of interesting. I think if you've been reading anything about rent stabilization, that's put some landlords in some difficult situations with some statute changes. They're going to need some room to work through. The other really significant dislocation we've seen is in senior living, which is unfortunate because it's such a needs-based care segment that is absolutely required for our population. But it was already a relatively thin margin business, right? 25% maybe margin. And you've seen, you know, obviously we can talk about the increased interest rate expense, but on top of that, you've got, you know, in some cases, triple the labor expense, which was, you know, probably appropriate, getting a lot of these care workers into more of a living wage situation than where they were at previously. And then, you know, increase in food costs and increase in energy, keeping these buildings, you know, heated and warm and keeping our, you know, these residents comfortable. So That's been a significantly dislocated product type as well. As far as volumes are going, I think we are seeing significant volume. I think, we talk a lot about distress, but what's really interesting about this cycle is, I think it's a misnomer to call these completely non-performing. A lot of these borrowers are really good people whose livelihoods are tied to this debt, and they want to pay. They want to find a way to pay. And sometimes they just need some time to weather the dislocation and reposition their properties or their businesses. If they need to do some, if they're a widget maker and they need to reprice their widget, if that's what we're dealing with. And unfortunately, because banks are regulated, pretty stringently on proof of ability to pay and support of that real estate collateral, oftentimes their best option is to exit these loans through a loan sale and get them into the hands of buyers like ourselves, who can then afford that buyer the time that borrower, the time they need to weather that dislocation. And so, we are seeing billions of dollars come across our desks. And that, that number has steadily increased really since COVID. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, it's really amazing. You touched on so many points. So it's like we could have an entire webinar just off of everything that you touched on. But one of the things I really connected with you on is we share that similar paradigm. We're not in it there are folks, competitors in both our spaces, and I'm mostly play in the residential space, you mostly play in the commercial space. We both can name competitors in our space where loan to own is their thing. I mean, there was actually just an article done about a big group in New York who, is controversial because they buy from the banks and they don't buy at a major discount, but they jack the default rates. They specifically go out targeting, what you would call the loan to own kind of people. And one of the things I really acknowledge you for, especially in the commercial world, because some of these, you're dealing with a more sophisticated investor, so you don't necessarily need to take into consideration that they maybe made a mistake or a misstep. The fact is people just end up in situations, especially these mom and pop borrowers or, smaller groups that are not the Brookfields that can just walk away from an asset and still have plenty of money. It's really great that I always said what made that when we bought someone's loan, whether it was sub-performing, non-performing, or performing, it was a gift to that borrower because finally they had a lender that they could pick up the phone and talk to about a special situation. And I think that's really valuable. Trixy, special situations seems to be what probably you're up to these days, right? You're seeing a lot of the other side of that coin, probably borrowers coming to you when their loan is being put in special servicing, and talk about the state of the industry and what you're seeing these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you and Lena both touched on a very key point, which is something that has been a philosophy for me and for my teams throughout all the years, but that is that the borrower becomes critical in today's world, right? Historically, the last 10, 15 years, we could have looked at it very asset-based lending. We took the approach always of getting to know who the borrower was, where did their capital stack come from? Typically, ours were, B2B loans, right? So they're groups coming in, fixing up the home, selling them or keeping them. So we're originating in a very localized, regional, boots on the ground approach has been kind of our entire model on this. And as we've done that, what we've seen is, to your point earlier, the borrowers are very willing to talk to you now. They're very willing to say, hey, listen, here are the challenges. X and Y happened, and therefore I need help here. And I think if we maintain that approach of understanding and humanizing it a little bit, right, and understanding, okay, things happen, the world's changed, this particular pocket, this particular area is going through these different pieces, we're able to kind of put together products and situations where they can thrive and where their businesses not only can rework a situation, but also grow. And so we've seen a lot of that. We've seen specifically with our groups increasing in growth upwards of double digits. So we've seen that quite So, or on that one, and what we're really looking at is how much of what's going on in the world today is impacting their day to day, right? And that's going to be ever changing and evergreen. And I think what we've seen is that as we look at it very much on a quarterly basis and meet with them, it really helps both sides, both as an originator lender that's also continuing to service, as well as, you know, the different areas that we're willing to go into.
Wow. Yeah, the you know, that personal touch is really, well, I think, what it's all about. And Linda, I mean, your organization is there's like no better example of a long-standing nonprofit organization that is impacting individuals. I mean, you know, you have, I think, 24 kids whose lives literally hang on the services that you provide. And affordability is an issue. You know, Lena brought up the conversion thing. We were just talking about that the other day, right?
Yeah. I had so many questions as both ladies spoke. You know, I'm thinking back to a time like 2006, 2007, when the banks had REOs and the nonprofits could access those lists for opportunities. I remember one of the last properties I bought that way was a duplex here in Fort Lauderdale that I purchased for $47,000. And we were able to use that in our asset base for the clients that we serve for somewhere around maybe 10 years. And then we sold it and sold it for over 300,000, which helped our bottom line here. But, you know, one of the questions I have for the panel is that day over? Is there going to be another opportunity for nonprofits to access real estate that way? And even and I know that, like in Broward County, home purchase is probably nil and void. But on the commercial side, we are really interested because you've got so many people post-COVID who their world's just shattered. And a lot of service workers, a lot of teachers, aides, a lot of people who are working folk who are out there every day trying to make their lives work, yet they can't afford to live in these high cost counties. And so nonprofits like mine, like one of the items on my dream list is to acquire a hotel where I could have families live with us in a setting like that with a commercial kitchen and some services, amenities that would serve that household, and they could stay with us for a year or two while they saved sufficient money to be able to be independent. So I just wonder, are there opportunities in the commercial setting for something like that?
That is a great question. And Lena, I'll let you answer first, because I think maybe we're not quite, I'll give you my opinion and then I want to hear from Lena and Trixy. It's coming is the answer. Statistically, especially Lena brought up a point with multifamily might be interesting. I entirely agree with that. There's multiple issues with multifamily. One being you've got this disjointedness amongst developers and sponsors. Guys that, you know, the industry had been modeling 2 years ago to sub-5 caps because money was so cheap that it would make sense that you could still positively leverage a sub-5 cap deal because the money cost 4%, right? Now that world is blown up, right? That doesn't exist anymore. Maybe in certain really, you know, class A++, you're still, you know, mid singles, but you're kind of returning to a normalization. And statistically right now, we have the largest number of multifamily units under construction at this moment in history. Now, they haven't come online yet, but if those two forces are kind of playing simultaneously, my guess is that we could see some real opportunity there. Lena, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, so first I'll address Linda's question, and are there big REO buying opportunities? And I think, you know, coming out of the great financial crisis, that cycle looked very different for two primary reasons. One, the underlying collateral was much tougher than what we're seeing today. The amount of busted resi development, busted condo that we were seeing back in 2008, 2009, which also required such significant discounts to the price because so much additional, dollar for dollar money had to be put in to bring that collateral up to something, of standard. So that's the primary difference. We're seeing, pretty good. I mean, there's Class A, beautiful office buildings on K Street in DC that are, coming onto the market because they're 42% occupied and the borrower has 0.25 debt service. But they're beautiful pieces of collateral. The duration on the exit is much longer. And so to answer your question, I also agree with Bill. I do think we are going to see some, but will not look, I do not believe, like the great financial crisis REO sort of wave that that hit. And a lot of that happened to be resi as well, right? Because a lot of it was tied to, easy money at the residential level. The second,
go ahead. I'll come back to it. Go ahead.
Yeah, the second differentiator is if you think about where we were, kind of great financial crisis that put us into a position of federal relief. And so we saw a decreasing interest rate environment versus, what we're in right now, which we can have a whole separate debate on higher for longer or when that rate cut's actually going to happen, if it happens. But that feels very different as well. And so that's sort of separating it. And then to just headline back to, my answer for Linda is, I don't think it'll look like great financial crisis type of REO. I do think we're going to see it. I think something that's been missing from the market for the last, call it 2 years, has been very surprising to me, is we have not seen a lot of small balance borrowers come into the market through bank sales, which banks are our primary sellers. We haven't seen a lot of that product. And we know the small business owner is hurting. We know it. And so to not see their debt come on the market is sort of, it's sad for two reasons. One, we really like that product, but two, I think, Bill, you had mentioned sometimes it's a relief for these borrowers because they actually have somebody who can work with them to figure out how they're going to extricate themselves from their debt position. And so that's been a bit surprising. And I think it's mostly driven by the fact that a lot of the banks that we've been dealing with have much bigger fires to put out right now. And so, Linda, we are seeing some hospitality. We saw a lot of hospitality post-COVID, right? As a lot of these hotels had to shut down, but we were seeing really, more trophy properties, things that you knew were going to return once shelter in place and once travel came back. But now we're starting to see that hospitality exposure come back for limited service or full service hotel that were sort of already in trouble pre-COVID, and that sort of limped along with all of the federal help and stimulus. There are segments of hospitality, depending on location, which we all know real estate is heavily dependent on that just the absorptions are negative, right? They're really tough environments. So I do think we'll see some of that. And then finally, Bill, to your point about multifamily, I 100% agree. When you started talking about sub-5 cap rates, that is absolutely something we were seeing, especially in vintage, loans that were originated 2017, 2018, 2019, pre-COVID. We were seeing sub-5 cap rates with year-over-year rental growth, expected, and continued, low interest rate environment. And so it's both going to be what was originated, and then your point about what's coming online and the type of product that's coming online. And I think Linda might have something to say about this because it doesn't tend to skew towards affordable housing. It tends to skew more towards that, higher end luxury product. And so, what does that all mean for the market and trying to absorb that?
Yeah, and it's funny because I mean, it's a little funny to hear it from, but everybody I speak to, Linda, in Florida and in markets like yours, of all classes, are suffering some sort of affordability crunch. We know that, and to me, this resonates as a very similar feeling, albeit different. I'm a believer that history rhymes and doesn't repeat. There was that kind of weird aura around residential in 2006. And then all of a sudden things just slowed down in 2007. And then, the knife started falling and then the banks started crashing. So I feel like we're on the precipice of greater opportunity. But, affordability, Trixie, what do you got? What are your thoughts on all of that?
So agree with everything you guys have been saying. I viewed the world from the other side a little bit, being that one of my companies, I was the one disposing of the REO and short sales, right?
That's
So my
right.
clients were the banks and servicers.
That's how we met.
Yeah. And so it was kind of this, balancing act of like, okay, on one side of the house, I'm selling the inventory. On the other side, I'm lending to the groups buying the inventory, right? So you're telling one group, hey, this is what it's really worth, and here's why. You're telling the other group, give me highest and best execution, but don't go overboard. I'm not going to lend you money because I don't want to get stuck holding the bag. So kind of looking at it from both perspectives, what we really became, I would say, focused on and drilled in on is the data. And so looking at it now, there's a lot of things that have changed in the resi space. The banks and servicers are now much more equipped to handle situations where this came on us in the financial crisis as a giant tidal wave, right? And there was no real kind of, oh my gosh, what do we do? And so there's kind of that aspect of it. But as we look at what's going on and we look at what's coming down the pipe, we do see, to your point earlier, a lot of what I would call more private regional sales, right? A lot of these groups perhaps having money lent to them from community banks that are probably not continuing to do it in that space. We're seeing that. We're seeing things being sold privately. We're being things to different charities. I am seeing that starting to happen. I do believe exactly what Bill is saying, that the day is coming. I think there's an opportunity there where some of these loans that are being recasted, right, that were adjustable, that now we're tracking, and the homeowner hasn't exactly changed positioning in life or in their career path, but their note is changing, right? So as we kind of go through that and we see where these factors and indicators lay, we go through it and look at it from the perspective of, if the world were to continue, right? And if these things happen, here's what we did last time, and here's how we can help this time. And so kind of taking that proactive preventative approach, I've seen kind of across the playing field, if you will, which is something that was completely foreign the last time around, on top of everything that you said with the different collaterals and equity and all of that in the homes.
That's a great perspective that I hadn't thought of. And certainly the servicers are looking down the path,
right,
of how can we pre-manage these things,
right?
And to your point, Lena, about the smaller mom and pop operators, what we call the low balance commercial deals, I would think that I was starting to think, well, maybe the PPP money has kind of helped those folks along, and like you said, the banks do have much larger fish to fry. Everybody who watches the news knows that the microscope is on New York Community Bank the last 2 weeks, and this entire sell-off of their stock came because of one line in their report that noted that they had to write off 2 loans, just write off 2 loans, and it was like $140 million or something. For 2 loans. It's like, oh, it's just 2 loans. So there's multiple ways of looking like that. Like, there's one way is we only have 2 loans that we had to write off. The other way is we wrote off only 2 loans and it was over $100 million. So it's really interesting scenario. I'm such a student of history. I just get so fascinated with trying to see how things, how society seems to repeat itself in some ways. Let's talk about innovation in leadership. Is each of you are, either the CEO or the founder of your organization, or you're certainly in the leadership roles that you're in. And I'd love to hear from each of you, what is like something that you are proud of, both in the way that you empower your people, or the way your leadership style, or an innovation that you might have brought either to your industry or to your place. I know I didn't prep anyone. I just want everyone to know I didn't prep these you with these questions, so that's a on the spot. So who wants to take that one first? Lena?
Happy.
Oh, Trixie said
Yeah.
happy. Okay, let's go. And then okay, go.
So I would say that more and more apparent that it's gone on, that we can really take a look at our leadership as women and how that impacts not just our teams, but our companies, right, and in our industries. And one of the things that I'm most proud of is that the team speaks for itself. In my case, us having worked together, seen each other through graduations, marriages, divorces, deaths, children being born, all of these different things, and still keeping that community, if you will, and being able to also weather the storm of what it looks like to sell and monetize companies and sit out non-competes, and how do you carve out people, and how do you do all of these things, and having 3 different platforms at the same time. Really, it comes down to the leadership that we instill in others, right? And so for me, it was, how do we utilize today's technology, right? Today's tools that we have, machine learning, AI, to create and enhance jobs and help provide tools for the teams rather than minimize headcount, right? How do we utilize that? And, you know, in a previous life, we did that utilizing technology to sell real estate, right? Like we were just talking about, and to be able to lend on that. And so really being open with the team and being able to explain, these are the challenges, here's the issue that we're having, here's the vision, here's the goal, but being transparent with them, constantly being able to say, here's where we missed, here's where we did a good job, but having that transparency. And I think that self-awareness as the leader and as the woman in business, it's going to be a different set of challenges, right? And it's not right or wrong, it's just the way that it is. And so the more that I think we can be open about that and not create a stigma or this like feeling of shame of like, oh, we have a challenge. Yeah, of course, we're all human. We're all in business. Business is about solving problems, right? We get paid to solve problems and create companies out of it and create opportunities. And so I think having that openness and the self-awareness as a leadership team is key in today's world. I really do. And I think that opens up the ability to be able to be innovative.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this webinar, and we will do more like this, honoring powerful, innovative, accomplished female leaders like yourself, is because I am one that believes that emotional intelligence goes a long way in your life. And, you know, I mean, I don't want to be stereotypical ever, but I tend to think that women have generally more emotional intelligence than men.
I mean, I'm not going to argue that one.
You got that right, Bill.
So, yeah, that's really great. Lena, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I think what I'm most proud of is, first of all, it's very rare to find a woman CEO, CIO in the distressed credit space. There's just not many of us. And so to try to find a team of investment professionals that represent, you know, we want to walk the walk. And so what I'm most proud about is 50% of our investment professionals here are female, and 50% of the entire firm is female.
Wow.
According to our, you know, institutional investor network, who tracks such things, that's considered a perfect score, which, you know, we would always try to do better than 50%. But it has been very difficult to find women in finance who have the heart for distressed credit. And I think what we've discovered as we've been out visiting colleges and universities is that a lot of young women who are math brained or who would sort of skew towards, you know, a finance profession tend to go into STEM, because that's what's been really pushed into the high schools, is that, you know, we've got this gap from women in education in the STEM fields. And so they tend to go engineering or biology or the other sciences. And I think, you know, one of the weaknesses of that push has been, you know, many of those positions end up still in cost centers of businesses and not in managing P&L. And so it's really important that we get women into the seat of managing the P&L instead of just being in the cost centers of the world. So that's something I'm very proud of. I actually echo a lot of what Trixy is saying. I think, you know, my leadership style is to teach or coach. I come from an athletic background, and so I'm always about, you know, the coaching, but to coach and then empower. And then give consistent and timely feedback. That's really important, right? Especially, you know, I've got a younger team, or more of a barbell distributed team. I've got some really young folks and I've got some really veteran folks, which is great because it gives our young people a very long runway to look at career growth. But to stay competitive, one of the things I have found that makes us very competitive is something Trixie mentioned, and that is being transparent. We're a small firm. There is 18, 19 of us across the two companies that work really closely together. And what I can offer that a big, one of my big competitors can offer is the young people I bring in get to see how the whole business works. So they're understanding fund structure, they're understanding leverage, they're understanding cash management, they're understanding the investment piece, and then how do you monetize the asset. So they get to see the entire workings of the business versus, I came from Carvel, right? So, I spent 10 years there as a big firm, and it was an amazing experience because I was there when we were small and then grew into this, pretty large fund. And I think what's so interesting about when you join a really big fund is, you kind of have to become proficient in your job. You spend a couple of years there, then you get moved up, you become proficient in that job, right? It's more of that corporate mentality. And we can differentiate ourselves with the talent we acquire. We clearly are more a fit for entrepreneurial spirited people or opportunistic people who have a desire to learn the whole business. So I think that I echo what Trixie said there, and really feel like that's been a competitive advantage for us and something I'm proud of.
It's really, really, really amazing stuff. And you know what? I actually learned something from there that, it was a great reminder for me when you said, checking in and consistently, because I just made a note to myself mentally, maybe I need to be checking in with my people more, especially because my staff's all over the country. So we don't even have an office that we meet in. So we meet online, obviously, once a week, but that individual leadership, I think that sets a great example. Linda, let's hear from you on some of the amazing innovations you've been up to, or just whatever you're proud of.
Well, let me say that I'm really inspired by what I've heard from both Lena and Trixie. What I am most proud about is that I think starting with always being prayerful that I hire the right people. And I've been very successful in that. I've got folk who are expert at what they do, which means I don't need to think about trying to know everything because I've got people around me who are expert in their areas. We've got a small but mighty team, and we're people who take care of people. So every day you're dealing with the burdens of others. You're really working with people at the worst times of their lives, facing homelessness, all kinds of crisis in their lives, whether they are jobless in our employment programs. But I've tried to, over the last 17 years that I've been here with H.O.M.E.S, Inc., build a machine that is humanistic. So my first client is the people who work with me. Mm-hmm. I have to help them solve the problems that they have from the life events that occur in their lives before they can manage other people's issues and concerns. So whether there's a death in a family, I've got somebody who works with me whose daughter died last year from breast cancer. And she now has grandchildren. She's in her 60s and she's raising grandchildren. So her work schedule looks like she needs it to look. Right now she's probably out picking kids up. So she's not a 9-to-5er. But last year on Christmas Day, I had an apartment building flooding and she was on set. She was on out there all day on Christmas.
Wow.
So I give to people what they need from us. I have someone who adopted 2 children. So rather than give her a $10,000 or $15,000 annual increase, I gave it to her in a lump sum because she had an event in her life that money helped her be able to do what she needed to do for her newly acquired family. And again, we're not a 9-to-5 organization. You can't put people on a shelf. The clients that we serve, especially the young people who live on our campus, at 2 o'clock in the morning, sometimes they're calling with something that's catastrophic for them. So I can't expect that housing manager to be in the office at 9 o'clock if she's been on the phone or even sometimes out picking a kid up in the middle of the night. So I think that the thing that helps me most know that we're doing the right thing is investing in the people who do the work.
Yeah. Oh God, that's good. You inspired me just the way you speak, Linda. I'm starting to think I'm not a great manager from listening to all three of you. I'm gonna have to take classes from
You know what I tell people, Bill? It's hard work, HARD,
Yeah.
and it's heart work.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
it touches you.
Well, there's no doubt between that. It's just obvious that all of you, all of us, really are passionate about making a difference in our communities, in our society, and in the culture, in the worlds that we live in. And that's a great segue to what I'd love to talk about in terms of being a leader of an organization, and whether and having to balance that with life. I happen to have been a single father for a number of years, raising a daughter and two sons. And so I've had to always balance everything and make it work. Like what you're speaking to, Linda, with some of your staff. I'd love to hear from each of you some of the challenges or insights into what it's like to be leading an organization or a group, and being pulled in all those directions, and how do you keep all of that balance and stay sane? Who wants to take that one first?
Happy to.
I knew it.
I have a word quota. I never miss, as you guys can tell. So I think that's such a loaded question, right? And
Yeah.
And we're asked that, and I think, I don't know how it is for Lena and for Linda, but for me, this is an everyday thing, right? I have two small boys that are 3 and 5 years old, and I'm so blessed and so grateful. And I'm a planner. I planned to have them after I sold my companies, and then guess what? Life happens, and you're like, oh, just kidding. Now we've got to pivot. And I think
Right.
I think that is so much a part of how it is to juggle all of it, right? So you look up one day and you realize, like Linda was sharing, where I almost cried, by the way, with what you were saying. So thank you for that. That you realize you're impacting people's lives and what you do. But I think for me, the biggest lesson that I've learned, and that is loving yourself first. Putting, like, the best investment we can make is in ourselves. And I know that sounds so cliche, but it's so true, because we are the business in whatever aspect we are, whether it's in actual business, running companies, founding companies, running teams, being a mother, whatever it is, we really are the business. And so many times we are taught to just be the fixer, just fix everything and calm that person in front of you down. Be responsible for their feelings, when that's not actually real life, right? Real life is, how are we going to accomplish the goal and be able to bring goodness, right? And so I think loving yourself first, and in every aspect of that, whether that means, hey, let me find a time to take one less phone call and get a 15-minute workout in because it clears my mind, or let me, do one less thing for what I'm supposed to be doing, so that I can be able to, have my own validation and my own feeling. And I learned that in many ways. I learned that because, let me tell you, it's not easy going in and raising money in a time where that didn't happen. And, oh, your name is Trixie, and you don't on paper look like what we're supposed to do. And I'm like, guess what? I don't in real life either. I'm never going to look like you, and I'm okay with that, right? And being able to have taught the teams and my clients, like, listen, you got to be you, but also be the best version of you, become an expert in what you do and be the best at it. And in order to do that, you have to love yourself first. And I just go back to that because I think that it exudes every single aspect of that. Then you have the ability to do the time management and be able to do the different things that go into being able to juggle it all on a daily. But it is a challenge, not going to lie. My real bosses are 3 and 5 years old.
Oh yeah. That's right. Our real bosses are our kids. That seems that way, doesn't it? Lena, how
Yeah.
about yourself? I mean, I have so much respect for this organization that you created for so long. I don't know much about your personal life, so maybe
Mhm.
maybe you got all the time in the world.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a, I am the classic unit, I'm a paradox and the unicorn all in one, right? So I'm a mom of four.
Wow.
And, um, and yeah, I think, listen, I was laughing, Trixie, when you said this is something that you do every day, because I talk about balance over the course of a year. Because if I had to measure it on a daily basis, I would just be failing, right? And so I don't measure it that way. Whenever someone on the team is talking about, their balance, I'm like, we gotta look at it over the course of the year, right? So that's one thing. I will also tell you, I've had a pretty significant evolution in my thinking, right? From 20-year-old me to, the 40-something-year-old me. And that was, I took pride when I was young and being, perceived as that superwoman. And I think many of us driven, ambitious women aspire to that. And it was, looking back, I wish I could tell young me that that was a mistake, that was holding all of us to a certain standard that is really difficult to achieve. And I did it, right? Like I was working 6 hours a week and going to law school at night, and I had two of the kids at that time. And I was married young as well. But so when I think about, how do I balance it now? My big evolution has been, I don't have to do it all on my own. That's not the measure of my worth. In fact, the measure of my worth is really about the team I'm building and the support network I have. And that's been a really freeing and also scary thing to undertake, is to trust in those people that you have pulled into your circle to help you. We're going to help each other, and it's clearly symbiotic. I'm going to help them with career growth and getting to where they want to get in their lives. And, they're helping me build a pretty amazing company. And then, you have your circle as well outside of that. And I really count on that to stay balanced. I will say, for me, a big change was this. We were in a two-parent income, family, raising four kids, and my husband was in a job where he was traveling all over the globe. And I started Stillwater Asset Management in 2017, and we bought this office building that we're actually in now. And one of the retaining walls in our courtyard caved in, and I'm trying to start this business, and I still have, four kids who need to be places. And I remember calling my husband on the phone and just saying, listen, the courtyard wall caved in, and something's got to change. And he said, you know what, you're right. I think we're getting a sign, both, literally the wall is caving in, and figuratively. And so we had the opportunity, and we were able to have him leave his job. And I will tell you that made all the difference for me, because I knew the kids were taken care of on the things they need to get done, the household, even the office building, managing the office building, and, the technology and all of that. So that was a game changer for me personally. Not everyone, has that,
Right.
that ability. And so it was a game changer for me. But I realized that not everyone has that ability to do that.
Yeah, no, that is fantastic. I have a sister-in-law that is a general counsel and makes enough money that her PhD husband gets to just stay at home, he cooks, he cleans, he takes the kids to school, he watches their investments. It's the balance, and it's great when you have that. Obviously, Linda, probably a lot of the folks that that you're dealing with, it's a different story. But let's talk about you personally and your balance in life, and some insights there into what, I mean, 17 years with H.O.M.E.S and the CEO, and talk about, give us some tidbits here.
All right, thank you. So I have to say that when I took the torch from our founder, Catherine Barry, as a woman of color, I thought, Lord, are you sure this is the direction you want me to go in? Because I don't know a lot of people with money. So after talking with him, we came to a conclusion that this is his work. I'm the vessel. So when there's a money problem, I say, okay, Lord, you got mail. Really, because I feel like I tap into my faith. And things are, Kathy and I had lunch not long ago, and she shared with me that she was talking with friends and they asked, how is H.O.M.E.S doing? And she said, unbelievable. Things are better than they ever were before. And things are really good. But I think, again, that's because of the team of people who work with me. I've got great folk who own the responsibilities that they have. I think of a little ditty I used to hear my mom say, if a task you once begun, never leave it till it's done. Be the labor great or small, do it well or not at all. So if folk do what they're supposed to do, then I don't have the burden of what, trying to fix that kind of stuff. The other thing I wanted to mention was that I'm in my mid-60s now. So I've given myself permission to not feel guilty about time I take off. I always used to leave time on the books, not take my vacation, come to work sick. But now I give myself permission to take care of me, tapping into what Trixie said. Loving yourself is first, because if I don't have the balance that I need, I'm irritable. People here aren't getting what they need from me. Recently, I had surgery and my plan was to take 3 weeks off. I found out that 3 weeks wasn't enough. So I took an additional 2 weeks and worked from home. And that helped me get better. And this is my first week back at work. And I have to say, I'm smiling, I'm happy, and folk are happy around me because of it.
It's really great, loving oneself, and what, Lena, you were saying in terms of just the space of trusting people. For me, that has been one of the huge breakthroughs in my leadership in the last few years, is really enabling and empowering people, and knowing that the true leadership is allowing people to discover things for themselves, not just telling them what to do, being there and treating them like humans, and it all goes with each of our philosophies, I think, of leadership. But these are, this being human and being kind to people and making a positive difference, Linda, you refer to praying, I consider it like living into a future, really the power of now, the secret, right? That if you're, if you believe it already exists, or it can exist for you, that it does become so the classic self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, it has been really, really great to be with each of you, and I am so in awe of your leadership, your humanity, the individual trails that each of you have blazed. Can I ask you each for one more quick answer to what we're in the world of real estate and finance, each of us in different ways. I'd love to just get a bold prediction, and it doesn't have to be real. If you want to make something up that you think is just funny, what is 2024 going to look like? Anything that you might see that you could predict out of your crystal ball? For it just seems so strange a time. I'd love to hear from each of you. And Trixie, you got to start us off, of course.
So
bold prediction.
I think that we're headed into a opportunistic type of play, right? And I think that that is consistent with what we saw, rates going down, and I think that with that happening, you're going to see people wanting to make investments again, right? They're not going to just want to sit on cash and things like that. All of that is going to come into play. And I think that the more we keep our eyes open and our ear to the ground, the more opportunities we're going to see. But I think especially like we've talked about multifamily and single family, we're going to definitely be able to see opportunities in that. And I'm starting to see that now. So we had the big build to rent play. We've seen that. We've gone through that. and are continuing to go through that. In Florida, there's been a lot that's taken place, right? And so we see that the housing crunch has been the housing crunch. And I think that people are starting to settle into, okay, what can I do now to establish and maintain my financial roots? I've seen the thinking shift start to happen. Once that thinking shift starts to happen, you start to see, my experience is you start to see the real estate right behind it. So my prediction is that, you know, we're headed into an opportunistic type of an environment.
Sounds good. Well, that's music to my ears. Lena?
Yeah, no, I echo Trixie's sentiments. I think on the commercial side, specifically around private debt, I think we are going to see volumes continue to increase with banks looking to take risk off the balance sheet by selling loans. I think products will be varied. It's not going to all be office. I think we're going to see pretty diversified portfolios come to market. I think banks are actually going to utilize loan sales as a risk management tool. We saw the stigma of a loan sale, you know, sort of post-great financial crisis really go away. Pre-great financial crisis, you know, no bank had any criticized assets on the books, right?
Right.
And I think what we see now, what we saw sort of post-GFC was really the market viewing loan sales as a positive from a bank balance sheet management standpoint. And in fact, if you pull up publicly traded banks who sold loans out to the market, share price went up as soon as they announced it to the market. And we didn't have any recent examples of that until just, you know, the last 18 months as PacWest and Capital One and now, you know, New York Community is talking about offloading and what happens when they actually sell those assets out to the market. You know, I expect share price will go up. And so banks will absolutely do it for that reason, you know, market perception of management of risk. But secondly, because we've come off of 10 years of, you know, compressed net interest margins with low interest rates, really driven by low interest rates, you know, it was really a case for efficiency ratios at these banks. And so no one was building up cost centers like special assets groups. And so there's not even the talent to really step in at a lot of these banks and work these loans out. So my big prediction is we're going to see a lot of banks deploy assets out to the market as a risk management tool, but also as a resource management tool because they just don't have the skill set in-house.
Wow, that's even better news for us. I love it. Keep it coming. Now, Linda, you and I never even got to tell everyone about our HUD program. They can listen to your and my podcast to hear more about it, or they can look you up on the web. But you know, we're in what our program has been doing is buying vacant HECM loans. So these are reverse mortgages after the borrower has been deceased, and then taking those properties, working it out with the heirs, fixing them up, and then offering that back to end users and nonprofits on a first look basis. So it's a real win-win to communities and whatnot. And we know that people aren't going to stop dying. So we know our inventory is still there, especially the baby boomer generation. But what is your prediction? Do you have anything you want to put on the shelf for a bold prediction for 2024 and beyond?
So yes, Bill, after listening to Trixie and Lena, let me say that as the commercial markets improve, my crystal ball is telling me that the philanthropic reality of the world will also improve.
Wow.
That we will use the model that the Humane Society has used for no stray animal. We'll have no stray people. Everybody who wants a roof will have a roof.
Wow. I think there is no better way to end our day than with something like that. Linda, Lena, Trixie, thank you so much for spending Valentine's Day with me. And thanks to all of our loyal listeners for joining the Win-Win webinar. We'll see you online and we'll see you out there in the markets. Have a great day.